Hey, well, good afternoon and welcome to Lunch with a Leader. We're so honored that you would take some time out of your crazy schedules to be here with us today. We exist to help change our community one leader at a time. And so we pray that this time would equip you and help you to lead like never before in the spaces and places that God has given you influence. So just continue eating. I hope you're enjoying that delicious Chick-fil-A. Thank you to Andy Duncan and his entire Chick-fil-A team for this awesome lunch. And so as you're eating, Mike's gonna come here in just a moment, and we're gonna be continuing through the life of Joshua, and we're really gonna be diving through his life and trying to find some practical leadership principles that we can apply to our lives, so that that the spaces that God's given us influence would look so different and feel so different for the people that we're leading because you guys were here today. So thanks for being with us, and we've also got the notes on the table with the pens that you'll be able to take notes with today. So glad y'all are here, and Mike's going to be here in just a moment.
Well, hello everybody. Thanks so much for being here today. Can we just take a vote? The weather's got to go. Can we all agree? The weather has got to go. It is just nasty outside. But I am so glad that you're here. You brightened up our day from our North Star team. Thank you so much for being here. And I echo what Cole said. Huge thanks to Andy and his amazing team from Chick-fil-A. Will y'all let them know how appreciative you are? So thanks for taking time to be in the room today. Thanks to all of you that are joining us from wherever you are online today. We're so glad that you are with us today. So two things right at the top. Normally one of our online guys who joins us every month from Alabama, where he resides, but he was able to be in Atlanta today. He was a longtime head baseball coach at Young Harris College at UT Martin, and now works for an organization called Score International. But a good friend of mine, Rick Robinson, got to be here today. Would y'all welcome Rick to the room today? We're so glad to have Rick, the great, legendary baseball coach. Also in our midst today is a winner of this award. It was the Public Safety Officer of the Year, Chief Bill Westenberger with the city of Kennesaw. Would y'all let Chief know how proud you are of him? Very deserving. And we're so honored you guys got to be here. So right in the middle of your table today are your notes. Go ahead and take those out. There's also some pens. You can take those pens with you. You will not be charged for them, so that's not stealing. And so you can take those pens. Also probably some little cards that have some future dates, just so you can keep up month to month. We're in. So we're rolling. These will be our dates as we go, unless something crazy happens. So let's pick up the story of Joshua. Here's Joshua. We found them last month crossing this overflowing, flooded Jordan River, and we talked about lessons, memorial stones, lessons we learn in doing impossible things and how God is faithful in those. Well, today they've crossed the river. So I want you to remember this. They have been in the wilderness for 40 years, not 40 days, not 40 weeks, now 40 months, 40 years. And while the children of Israel were in the wilderness, they got into some bad habits. They weren't always at their best. They weren't always living at their highest. But they are about to get into battles as they cross the Jordan River. So I want you to remember this principle. Just because you get into the promised land or you're going to the promised land doesn't mean you won't face battles. It doesn't mean that you won't face things that you don't see coming. I think in the children of Israel's minds, the work's done. I mean, gosh, God's given us the land. We're going to be there. But there are some battles ahead. But before they face external battles, they're going to face some internal battles. So first little point there, before Joshua and Israel could conquer Jericho in chapter 6, God first had to conquer their hearts in chapter 5. So today we're going to be talking about some principles of our hearts. I think here's what I want you to write down. Ready? 2 words: internal, external. Right? Internal, external. There's an internal life that's got to be in order before the external life has the impact it could possibly make, right? So the hard part is, as leaders, we can become focused on the external me, not the internal me. So y'all help me out real quick. I'll address it. I'll mention back so people online can hear what you said. Why do we focus sometimes as leaders on the external, not the internal? What would y'all say? Somebody raise their hand and throw it out, and I'll repeat it back so everybody can hear it.
It's what everybody sees.
It's what everybody sees, right? We're about the part that everybody else notices, right? How many of y'all, let's be honest, have gotten a little caught up in you? Have you ever done this before? Like you got a new title or you got a new job and you got a little caught up. Raise your hand if you've gotten a little caught up in you. We all do, don't we? Because we get focused on the external and not the internal. Why else do we focus on the external more?
Nothing's wrong with us internal. We don't feel anything wrong with us internal. It's always external. It's what we got to always fix.
Good. So we don't feel anything's wrong with us internally. It's always the external piece that we've got to fix. Why else do we focus on external more than internal?
It's about other people, not us.
It's about other people, not us. Very good. So here's this life. So no matter what seat you sit in leadership, right? And in this room, you've got people all over the map in different positions. No matter what seat we sit in, we've got to figure out the internal if we're going to make the external matter, right? Joshua learns this the hard way. Principle number 1, as spiritual leaders, the greatest barrier we'll encounter is not the size of the task, but the status of our obedience. It's not the size of the task in front of us, it's the status of our obedience. How willing are we to be obedient? And this is the part I want you to write down: when nobody's watching. How willing are we to be obedient when the eyes of the public are not on us? How willing are we to be obedient when our team doesn't have binoculars on us? Am I obedient only when people are watching, or am I obedient all the time, right? Am I putting on a facade to make you think I'm something I'm not, or is that really me? So my generation, how many of y'all ever watched the show Leave It to Beaver? All right, oh, great show, right? You had Eddie, right? Eddie Haskell, and you had Wally. Wally, right? The brother. Eddie would try to fool the Cleavers. If you hadn't seen it, I apologize. You're missing out on a great generation of television. But anyway, so he's always trying to pretend he's something he's not. And we as leaders, we do that all the time. It's not the size of the task, but it's the status of our obedience. So I want you to read with me. When all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan, Joshua 5:1, and all the Canaanite kings who lived upon the Mediterranean coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan River so the people of Israel could cross, they lost heart and they were paralyzed with fear because of them. So here's this group of people. They've been living in this land for years. For years they've lived in this land. They hear about the obedience of the people and what God did, and they're terrified of them. Now, to the children of Israel, they probably didn't feel this way. I mean, we're coming in the land. Who are we? We're not trained in battle. We're not even good at this, blah, 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 all those things. And yet the people were challenged by their obedience. Great quote in here from Craig Groeschel, the pastor at Life Church. I believe Christians often perceive obedience to God as some test designed just to see if we're really committed to Him. But what it's designed is as God's way of giving us what's best for us. I want you to write this little point down. We're going to move on. Their obedience was seen and known as a people. Their obedience was seen and known. They had to cross the river at flood stage. It made no sense. But God tested their obedience and they proved trustworthy, right? Joshua said, all right, let's get the people ready, but it's at flood stage. Well, we got to go. How are we going to do it? Well, somebody's got to stick their foot in for the water to come back. And they were obedient, and their obedience mattered. All right, I want you to write this little thought down. We're going to move on to point 2. Your obedience matters. Your obedience in the smallest of things matters. So today, rather than me just sitting up here talking on and on, I brought up, I've got a great friend many of you know. If you're a regular Lunch with a Leader attender, this guy works with some of the greatest organizations in the country. They've been voted one of the top places to work in Atlanta at Addo for years, and they're phenomenal at what they do. So would y'all give a great hand to Mr. Kevin Scott? Would y'all give Kevin a hand as he comes up today? So Kevin, you live in the world of leadership, right? I mean, you live in that world of working with companies and working in the business world. Why do we feel like small and unseen things are less important than big things? Why do we feel like that as leaders sometimes?
Yeah, I loved some of these answers out here. The things we don't see as much, you don't get credit for. But I'm going to turn it around for a second and ask you a question. Do you love your wife?
Yes.
She in here?
Yeah, she is.
Okay.
Hey, baby.
Okay. How could you prove to me that you love your wife?
How can I prove that? I'm interviewing. Don't be changing this up.
You know,
It's about what I do, right?
and probably what you do consistently.
Right.
Because you may get her a birthday gift, but she probably has other people that give her birthday gifts. It's so often we think it's the big things we do, but the way that you show her you love her is in the small, consistent, daily things. Okay, when it comes to exercising, I feel like I need to get in shape, I'm out of shape. I've got 2 options. I could go one time and work out in the gym for 9 hours straight. How effective do you think that would be?
Nope.
Not very effective. Or I could work out 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week for a certain period of time. It's in those small things. I'll give you one more. If I only went to the dentist twice a year, but I never brushed my teeth, not very effective. But it's the small daily things we have to do. And I think especially for leaders, we become enamored by the big things, the exciting things. As somebody who speaks to groups, it's really exciting because they'll bring you in to speak to a group because they want to do a big thing, the 2-day retreat to make it happen. But it's in the small daily things where you really show your consistency.
What happens in those small daily things? What makes them make us better as a leader? If we do the small hidden things, and I want to get into some of those things here in a second. If we do those things, what makes us better as a leader for our organizations?
Yeah, I think it goes back to this obedience. When we show that we're willing to do the small things, number one, it develops a habit that we're going to move forward and have obedience. So that when the harder things come, we're still willing to do it. And the second thing is that people can trust us when we do the small things. When we show over and over that we're willing to do something, it develops trust in a way that inconsistency doesn't.
So you work with some incredible organizations. What are pictures of some of those small things in a leader's life that matter, that you probably don't go to a conference about? The small little behind the scenes thing that you may not read lots of books on how to be the best brand manager or how to do this, that, or the other. What are some of those small things? Give me some for instances.
Yeah, I'm looking at Andy Duncan back there. I feel like Chick-fil-A operators embody this, and they embody this because it's in their heart, but also because they watch the leaders at Chick-fil-A do it. If Dan Cathy was here today and he saw something on the floor, he'd be going around and picking it up. He'd be cleaning. He'd be saying right here at this table, hey, can I take your stuff away? Just consistently serving other people in there. They say so many leaders are focused on intensity, But the true mark of great leadership is consistency. The intensity is doing it forcefully one time. Consistency is over and over and over doing it. And I think serving people, showing that you care, just modeling those behaviors really are what separate a good leader from a great one.
Here's Joshua and these people. All they want to do is get to the promised land, right? They've been living in the wilderness for 40 years. I mean, that's their life. For most of them, that's all they know. Their parents died in the wilderness. So they're this new generation, and now they're just wanting to get to the promised land. But yet, all along the way, God is testing their obedience. Principle number 2, spiritual leaders aren't irreplaceable. If we aren't willing to obey, God will find somebody who is. So I want to talk about this real quick. Kevin, what happens to us if we think we're irreplaceable? What happens? We can throw names at this, which we're not going to do, all right? But we could throw names at this. What happens to us when we begin to think we're irreplaceable?
Yeah. That's tough because I think we can all think of those examples of leaders who have thought that. And I think the first thing is when we think we're irreplaceable, it immediately becomes about us instead of the people who we're leading. That's the very first thing. If we're irreplaceable, then all of these other people are disposable and it's all about me, which is a toxic quality of a leader to begin with. The second thing is when you think you're irreplaceable, it's amazing how the Bible says pride comes before the fall. Usually that's the precursor to a humbling experience that shows you how replaceable you can be.
Yeah. So here's what I want you to do at your tables. I want you to take a second right where you are, and I want you to talk about at your tables, why does it go through our brains as leaders that the show can't go on without us? Why does it go through? Because Kevin said it. It's toxic if we let that happen. So we're gonna give you 3 minutes, 30 seconds. On your mark, get set, go. Talk at your tables real quick. That's good. No elementaries. We had like 6 elementaries. All right, let me hear some feedback. What were some of the things that came out of your table? Why do we feel sometimes as leaders we're irreplaceable? Let me hear some thoughts from some of your tables. Ego. Yep. Immaturity. We think we know everything. Pride. What else?
Lack of trust.
Lack of trust in what way, Mike?
Well, we talked about that. So not only lack of trust in the people that we want to turn this over to, but lack of trust in trusting God first.
So it's not just turning things over to people, but it's lack of trust that God's got us. Because when we reach a point, right, it's up to us. It's been up to God. Isn't that funny how that happens? It's up to God to get us there. But then when we get there, we're like, okay, well, I got it now, right?
So we said it's lack of trust, but it's too much trust in ourselves.
Too much trust in ourselves. Very good. Anybody else? Not enough truth tellers around us. Unpack that a little bit, Coach Preston. So you don't have enough truth tellers around you and you get enough yes people, you can isolate yourself on an island where nobody's willing to be honest with you. And I'm telling you, there is a fall coming when we get there. What's the problem with having truth tellers around you? They're telling you the truth, right? I mean, it's like, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to know that. As Ann would say, Kevin brought up, Ann's in the room. Ann would say, you're the optimist, I'm the realist, all right? And so it's somebody to go, I know the balloon looks like it's going to fly, but we're going to pull the balloon back, all right? And so we need that because if we isolate ourselves, then, and this is what happened to Moses. We find Moses, pick up the story, Joshua 5, verse 6. All right, this is a fascinating. We won't cover all this, but I want you to know why we have this point. The Israelites had traveled in the wilderness for 40 years till all the men who were old enough to fight in the battle when they left Egypt had died. So literally anybody who could battle was dead, and now their kids are being raised. And here's why. For they, and I want you to circle the word, disobeyed the Lord. And the Lord vowed he would not let them enter the land he had sworn to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So Joshua circumcised their sons, those who had grown up to take their father's places. The whole disobedience had been Moses didn't do what God had asked him to do. Does anybody need me to cover that? All right, and so let's move on. Here we go. We know what that is. After all the males had been circumcised, they rested in the camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, today I've rolled away the shame of your slavery in Egypt. Joshua, you were willing to do something the great leader Moses wasn't willing to do. So I want you to think about this. When Joshua was under Moses, he was the 2. Joshua is now the 1. If Joshua had gone, the guys are not gonna like this. This is not gonna go over well, right? If they're voting on the next leader, I'm probably not gonna win the popular vote because this has happened, all right? If Joshua had gone that direction and been disobedient, how many more people would have been affected by his disobedience? So here's what I wanna unpack with Kevin a little bit. When you as a leader are disobedient, how does it affect your organization? In ways we don't even understand. What would you say?
Yeah, when you say it that way, I just start with this. I think it should be a word of caution to want to be a leader. Because in so many ways we glamorize leadership. We tell everybody, you should want to be a leader. Being a leader is great, and there are certainly positive things that come along with it. But I remember one time seeing, I don't know if you've seen this, the leadership triangle. Do you know what I'm talking about? If imagine we have a triangle here, and on one side of the triangle is the word influence. The higher you go as a leader, you gain more influence. And the other side of the triangle is responsibility. As you gain influence, you also gain responsibility. As we become more of a leader, we get both of those. But if you think about a triangle, it gets narrower at the top. And I saw somebody write the word choices in the middle. And they said as you gain influence and you gain responsibility, your choices are actually limited because your choices now have a larger impact on other people than they did before. I mean, the truth is if just somebody at the front line of an organization makes a decision, it doesn't mean their decision doesn't matter. It matters. But when a leader makes a decision, a leader of a church can have a moral failure and it can be the end of an entire local church. A leader of a business can make a financial decision, an integrity decision that causes the end of the entire organization. So the decisions that leaders make have disproportionate impact. And so number one, we ought to take them more seriously. And number two, we ought to go into leadership with more caution knowing that.
How many of you have been in an area of leadership like you've gotten the title you've always wanted, but after you got it, you went, I didn't know what all came with it? Raise your hand. It's a weird thing, isn't it? We'll talk in the football where we're in football season. I don't know how many head football coaches that are very respected guys, have won lots and lots of games. They would sit and tell you, I would give up my title tomorrow just to be a coach again. Because you've got so much more responsibility. You've got so much more that you are accountable for. God put you where he put you for a reason bigger than you, and your influence matters. There's not a person in this room whose influence doesn't matter to somebody. So my greatest area of influence is not being the pastor at North Star Church. My greatest area of influence was in my house with my wife and my kids. So if I fail there when nobody else sees it, there's no way I'll make it here. So if that's the only influence I ever had was my family, I can't fail the family. And when we're disobedient, when we think nobody, we in our brains train our brains that there's the public me and the private me, and the two don't have to match. Why is a leader in for a rude awakening, Kevin, if they think it doesn't matter? What would you say?
Well, yeah. I think, Mike, when a leader thinks that their decisions don't matter, they have really gotten to the point where we said this earlier, but they don't care for their people anymore. Yeah. Because when you think that this doesn't matter, you don't realize the stakes that it has. I remember in the early days of Addo, we had just started Chick-fil-A Leader Academy. I think it kicked off at North Cobb Christian a week or two ago. And it was fun. We got to go to those events. We got to do those things. It was exciting. Now I can remember seasons going into COVID where I sat and thought, if we don't make the right decisions, we won't be able to make payroll this month. And on one hand, it was a burden that I had to carry. But on the other hand, if I ever got to the point where I didn't care about that became flippant. That doesn't matter. I think I have lost the real ability to lead in a way that honors the people I'm leading if I think that doesn't matter.
So good. And the reason I wanted to hit this today, I think it's so easy to polish the outside and forget the inside. I mean, we polish the outside. We can make our Instagram look like anything we want. We can make our Twitter look like anything we want. We can make our Facebook look like anything we want. But the who on the inside is what's going to keep you in the game, right? That's going to keep you in the game. God is rewarding Joshua for doing what Moses chose not to do. Principle number 3, remember, the power of God is evident to us in the past, and it's still available to us today. The power of God evident to us in the past is still available to us today. While the Israelites were camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, they celebrated Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month to remember God's deliverance, to remember what God had done. They chose the 12 stones last time. They chose the 12 stones so they could remember God's faithfulness. What happens, Kevin, as a leader when we forget the faithfulness of God to us? What happens when we focus on the what we don't have rather than what we do have? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, we won't make the bold decisions, the courageous decisions that leadership requires. We've got to be willing to do that. The best example I have in this area is to encourage myself to go back and look at the times in the past where God was faithful. My wife, for my birthday, gave me a terrible birthday gift. She gave me one of those little things, the tiles. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where they go on your phone or in your wallet? Because she got tired of me misplacing things. She said it was awful. And you know how that goes. You misplace something and you ask somebody, and I always blame it on my wife. Where is this? Like she was hiding it or something. But you'd always go, okay, the conversation happens. All right, trace back where you've been. Where were the first place you went when you walked in the house? And you trace back and look. I think as leaders, we have to trace back and look at the times that God has impacted, God has come through, God has delivered. And when we trace back and see where we've been, we'll have the courage to take the step forward. And it's amazing because Joshua's an incredible leader, and you wonder, you know, we give Moses a little bit of a tough time here. You wonder, did you not see the same God that brought you through the Red Sea? You can't trust him now. But it's so easy for us to forget.
So here's what I want you to talk about at your tables. Why do we struggle remembering the faithfulness of God when facing new challenges? I think when we go, well, God came through with that, but I've got a new challenge now. Why is it harder to remember the faithfulness of God when facing new challenges? Talk about it at your table, would you? Sounded like some great dialogue at your tables. I want you to write this little thought down. We're gonna move on to point 4. Ready? The thought is this. This was said a lot on 9/11, 20th anniversary. We remember so we don't forget. We remember so we don't forget. Mother's Day is put on a calendar so we'll remember and we won't forget, right? Father's Day is put on a calendar. Christmas is put on a calendar so we'll remember and we won't forget. I think so many times in our lives as a leader, we live so fast that we miss the faithfulness of God in it. God answers the prayer. We're moving on to the next project. How many of y'all struggle with enjoying the presence because you're already thinking of the next challenge? Raise your hand. All right. So our daughter's getting married October 23rd. And I've told Ann, my biggest prayer for that day is this. I want to be in the moment. Because as soon as we're there, we got to get this thing cleaned up. We got to get out of here. I'm ready to get home. That's just the way that my brain works. That's the way I am. I'll be doing something, already thinking about the next thing. And we miss the faithfulness of God. Here's what I would challenge you as a leader to do. Set aside times in your life to remember. Put it in your calendar. 10 a.m. Monday morning, remember the faithfulness of God so I don't forget. And you'll look back and you'll go, man, God was faithful here and God was faithful here and God was faithful here. But normally we live lives at such a clipped pace that we forget. Number 4, public victories result from private visits with the Lord. I pray that you as a leader are meeting privately with the Lord. I pray that you never try to do something publicly without meeting with the Lord privately. So just think about your day. How many of you have somebody come to your office at some point in the day for advice? Raise your hand. All right. How many of y'all have somebody come to your office at some point during the day because they've got a big need in their life? They need prayer, or they just want you to know about the need. Raise your hand. Right? How many of y'all have points in the day that your opinion is asked for in the moment and you don't have time to go talk to the Lord about it? You've got to make a decision right then. Raise your hand. So how in the world do we make decisions like that without meeting with the Lord privately first? Isn't it funny? We think, well, I'm trained in counseling or I'm trained in this, but yet I'm giving somebody advice or counsel that could affect the rest of their lives. And I truly did it out of my pocket. I'm just giving them, I'm the master at just making things up, all right? And so some of y'all are going, I came to you for advice, not for you, all right? But anyway, so I could just make stuff up. I didn't pray about it. I didn't think about it. So if I'm privately not meeting with the Lord first, am I really ready to be received and used by the Lord publicly? Listen, not for a short time, but for a long time. Think back to our lives. You've seen flashes in the pan leaders. They blaze in the moment, then they disappear. They show up like a shooting star. It's like, wow, where'd that guy come from? Where'd that lady come from? They just shot up the ranks, but you look for them 10 or 15 years later and they're not there because who they were privately never matched who they were publicly. Their public promotion, they got promoted way beyond their character, is basically what happened. I remember hearing years ago at a big conference up in Virginia, a good friend of mine was at, and there was a pastor, so that's in the world I live in, pastor at the time that was smoking. Smoking. He was the guy. And he showed up, and my friend said he showed up with a posse. He showed up with like 5 people around him and came and went straight to his green room and got a check and waited till his time to speak. And my friend's like, oh, that's weird. I mean, he didn't talk to anybody, came in, got his microphone, got wired up, didn't speak to anybody, came out, spoke, and as soon as he got done, was gone. Then at the end of the day, there was a guy named Chuck Swindoll. Chuck Swindoll is the president of Dallas Theological, or was the president of Dallas Theological, longtime pastor, faithful servant of the Lord. The guy has lived it. Is he in his 80s, Cole? He's in his 80s now. And my friend said, I'll never forget, Mike, I'm on stage singing, and I watched this man just come walking in with his Bible, and I'm like, God, I think that's Chuck Swindoll. And he sits down on the front row and takes out his notepad and takes notes of all the other speakers. And he said, I went down to him and said, we've got a room set up. This was his response. I haven't finished my journey yet. I want to learn and grow as much as I can. There are leaders that make it the long term. My prayer for you in this room is you finish stronger than you started. Right? This is what makes Joshua so fascinating to me. Joshua finishes stronger than he started. Look at the story, Joshua 5. When Joshua was near the town of Jericho, he looked up, he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Jericho's gonna be where the battle is. With a sword in hand, Joshua went up to him and demanded, are you a friend or are you a foe? Should I be afraid or should I be happy? Is basically what he's asking. Neither one, he replied. I'm the commander of the Lord's army. At this, Joshua fell with his face to the ground in reverence. I am at your command. What do you want your servant to do? Basically, he saw an angel, right? And Joshua's response was, tell me what you want me to do. The commander of the Lord's army said this, take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy. And Joshua did as he was told. I want you to write this down, ready? It's a principle of the day. Any place where God's presence is a holy place. It's not just church. We've got 3 police chiefs in this room that are 3 of my favorite people in the world. You know what I love about these men? Chief Westenberger, Chief Flynn, and Chief Dennard in Ackworth. You know what I love about them? Is they treat their places that they work as holy places. Because that's their call. They're going to be a Christ follower. Yes, they got to deal with tough stuff. They got to deal, but yet they're trying to do it in a godly fashion. Any place is holy when God's presence is there. And here's what I'm going to tell you. There is not a thing, a place, a job, or profession that God doesn't want to choose to use you in. Whether it's a basketball court or an office. Whether it's at a car sales lot or it's FCA. Doesn't matter. God wants to use you there. That's why public victories always come from private visits with the Lord. My prayer for you is this, that you get it. I love this quote by Joe Frazier. Champions aren't made in the ring. They're merely recognized there. What you cheat on in the early light of the morning will show up in the ring under the bright lights. I remember years ago at Liberty, I'd just gotten to Liberty to play baseball, and the coach sent us out on our run. And in high school, you send kids out on a run, you got to watch them because they wander off and they go hide in the woods and they do things like that. So at Liberty, I'm just fully, we had like a whatever we did back then. And the coach goes, and he was in his 60s. He's like, boys, I'm going home. And you saw all the guys like, you're going home? Yeah, I'm going home to Miss Shirley. I'm headed out of here. And one of the players said, Coach, how are you going to know if we ran? He said, oh, we'll all know if you ran. Come first pitch in February, everybody in the bleachers, which meant nobody, all right, but everybody in the bleachers will know if you ran. Because what you do in private always shows in public. Would you pray with me? Father, today, thank you for our time. Thank you for a moment in the middle of a crazy Monday to meet with you. Not to be reminded of things that we don't already know, But Father, to be reminded of the things we already know, but we can so easily forget. So God, my prayer is on each one of these leaders that you would use them in great, great ways for you. And God, I pray that they finish their run as a leader stronger than they even began their run as a leader. So God, bless them and use them. And God, just continue to make us the people you created us to be. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. Amen. Would y'all join me and thank Kevin Scott too for joining me today?
So
awesome.
good. So good. Goodness, I hope that you guys got some good notes down like I did. Intensity versus consistency, having some truth tellers in your corner, what the triangle of leadership with responsibility, just doing the small things consistently. Mike mentioned Dr. Swindoll, and that story was from years and years ago. And 2 years ago, I was at Dallas Seminary watching him walk down the chapel aisle, slow and shaking hands with every woman and man who would approach him. And he is finishing the race well. And we are also here to help you finish the race well. So what we've got coming up, we've got Lunch with the Leader again on October the 25th. So you can go ahead and get that down on your calendars. Another resource that we want to equip you with is Mike has a phenomenal podcast called Linch with a Leader. And there's a new podcast actually dropping today, I believe. So be sure to go check that out. There's also some cards with all of the dates as well as the info for Mike's podcast on your table. So friends, I hope that today blessed you and encouraged you. So you guys are good to go and lead in the places that God's given you influence. Thanks so much for being here.